Live from London, this is BBC News. New data shows last month was the world's warmest January on record, raising further questions about the pace of climate change. More than 7 years after the Grenfell fire, the families of those who died have been told the tower block will be dismantled. The White House tries to clarify President Trump's proposal that the US take over the Gaza Strip and remove the Palestinian population. A new lawsuit has been filed against the rapper Sean Diddy Combs as he awaits trial on charges of sex trafficking. Hello, you're live with BBC News. I'm Catherine Biarahanga. The White House has attempted to clarify Donald Trump's proposal that the US take over the Gaza Strip and remove the Palestinian population. A spokeswoman said the president was committed to rebuilding the territory and temporarily relocating its residents. But on Tuesday, Mr. Trump said the displacement would be permanent. The US Secretary of State called it a generous offer to rebuild Gaza. This is what is left of the Gaza Strip after 15 months of war. More than 2 million Palestinians live there at the moment. The president's plan is to resettle Palestinians away from Gaza, relocate them to Egypt and Jordan, even though those countries have said no. Well, let's speak to our correspondent, Joe Winwood, who's in Jerusalem for us. And Joe, we're getting reaction from the Israeli government similar to these plans, saying that Gazans should be allowed to freely leave the territory.
Yeah, so this is from the Defence Minister, Israel Katz, and he's said in the last couple of hours he's instructed the IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, to begin putting plans in place to allow Gazans to leave. Now, his statement, it's very short on detail. It doesn't talk, for example, about how they would leave or whether they'd be allowed back in, but it does say that they want to give the option for Palestinians. And this is the way that this statement is framing it, as in giving them the rights, as he put it. What's also very interesting in this is that he makes an explicit suggestion that countries who have been very critical of Israel's conduct of the war over the last 15 months or so, countries like Norway, like Ireland, like Spain, should take Gazans, should take people who want to leave. He says they have a legal obligation to do so. Now, in the last half hour or so, the Spanish Foreign Secretary has rejected that entirely. And I think also this whole framing of this from the Israeli Defence Minister as about giving Palestinians rights to leave is going to be rejected as well, because what we've been hearing is increasingly strong criticism of this whole plan, this whole idea, as an attempt to force Palestinians out. Indeed, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said that the world should reject what he called ethnic cleansing.
And Joe, the world's media has been talking about President Trump's statements. Very little has been said about Prime Minister Netanyahu during this crucial visit. Could President Trump's comments give him some kind of political cover to carry on with the ceasefire deal, which is controversial within his own government?
Yeah, that is one theory that's been put forward, is that in putting forward these incredibly, should we say, strong suggestions, President Trump saying things which were beyond the wildest dreams of many on the Israeli right, that what he's done has given Netanyahu a kind of a cover, a way of persuading the far-right members of his cabinet of continuing the ceasefire, which is something they said they weren't happy to do. But that's the suggestion, that this gives him cover to do that. Of course, that is just a theory, and I think it's worth pointing out that many people are saying that whether he meant them or not, these words from Donald Trump have had a very serious consequence indeed. Serious consequences indeed.
Joe Winwood, thank you for that. Well, let's speak to our Gaza correspondent, Rushdi Abu-Alouf, who's in Cairo at the moment. So, Rushdi, that point that Joe was making there about potential consequences of President Trump's statements, particularly for the fragile ceasefire in place at the moment.
Well, you know, the second phase of the ceasefire, the negotiation for the second phase is supposed to start soon, as planned. And last week, when we were talking to the mediator, to the Egyptian and the Qataris, that they were saying that by tomorrow, Friday or Saturday, we should start this. But there is no sign of this. There is no sign of like a plan for Israeli delegation to come here like during the like previous negotiation. We haven't heard from Hamas anything about sending their own team to Egypt or to Qatar to talk about the second stage. So yes, nobody know about the second phase of the ceasefire. Nobody know if this ceasefire will last and for how long, if it's whole or for how long. You know, it's fragile. Yesterday, 2 people were killed in Rafah. We still have Israeli troops along the Philadelphia corridor, including some in Rafah crossing. We still have Israeli troops in the middle of Gaza, separating Gaza. Yes, they do allow people to walk back, and they do allow cars to go back to the north. But we still have large Israeli troops in maybe 7 or 8 areas, including significant Netzarim corridor, which can separate Gaza from south to north. So the ceasefire, the whole ceasefire is fragile, and nobody have, you know, this trust that this ceasefire could continue.
Indeed, and at the moment, we've seen many Gazans returning to their homes or what's left of their homes during the current ceasefire. How are they rebuilding if they can? And when you have comments saying that they should leave their territory, how are they reacting to those comments?
Well, you know, Palestinians are divided politically over too many things, including the 7th of October, but they are united to reject this Trump idea. I've been talking yesterday and the day before and this morning all day to people from all generations, old people who were, you know, one of them is from Jabalia refugee camp. He was displaced, he was forced to leave his village back in 1948 when Israel was created. And I was asking him that, are you seeing the same scenario when we talk about Gaza? He said yes, and we are not going to repeat the same mistake. So he said, I was like under fire with my wife and with my kids, with my you know, daughters and sons in the north, and he resisted all, you know, idea of this, and he refused to leave his house. Even young generation. Well, if we give emotional away a bit, people politically reject this, but yes, you will find many people in Gaza who would leave, but they want to make sure that they have the right to return. That's what most of the people told me, whether they are old or young.
Rushdie, thank you. That's our Gaza correspondent, Rushdie Abualu, speaking to us from Egypt. Scientists from the European Union say the world experienced the hottest January on record this year. Temperatures last month were 1.75 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and slightly warmer than January 2024. But scientists had initially predicted a slightly cooler start to the year due to a weather phenomenon known as La Niña. This graph shows the global average temperature by year compared with the pre-industrial average for January. The darker reds reflect greater warming, with temperatures in the 2020s all over 1 degree higher than the pre-industrial average. And we'll have much more on that story for you here on BBC News. Now, more than 7 years after the Grenfell Tower fire that killed 72 people in West London, the BBC has been told the government has decided to take the tower block down. A meeting has been held for the bereaved families and survivors of the Grenfell fire, attended by the Deputy Prime Minister. The charred remains of the tower block have stood shrouded in tarpaulin since 2017. Graham Satchell reports.
The message at the top of Grenfell Tower reads, "Forever in our hearts," and there are some who want it to remain as a permanent memorial to the 72 people who lost their lives. It's why the government's decision to dismantle it has been met with some dismay. Grenfell United, who represent many of the families of those who died in the fire, said ignoring the voices of the bereaved on the future of their loved one's gravesite is disgraceful and unforgivable.
There'll be a lot of anger, there's no doubt about that. A lot of people think it should remain as a rebuke to the people responsible. Some people think it should remain because it's a sacred site. I have my sympathy with that.
For others, the tower is an unwanted and traumatising daily reminder of one of the worst tragedies in recent history. In the end, however, The government appears to have made its decision on the advice of experts who've warned the structure of the building may be unsafe.
The engineering advice was very, very clear that the top 13 floors are being propped up by something like 6,000 props at the moment, and it is untenable to continue holding that building up. So from an engineering point of view, there is a real reason why this deconstruction has to happen.
The government said this is a deeply personal matter for all those affected, and it's committed to keeping their voice at the heart of this. The deconstruction of the tower will be a slow process. It could take as long as 2 years. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Well, let's get more on this with our correspondent, Tom Simons. And Tom, you've been following this story for many years. What more do we know about the government's reasons for wanting to bring the block down?
Well, we've asked the government to tell us more about why it's told the community that it's going to take the building down. And so far, they're saying nothing. And I can tell you that in 2020, they received an expert report from construction engineers which recommended that the tower be propped up in various places because effectively the concrete that reinforces Grenfell Tower is being damaged by the weather, and also every year the heating and the drying of summers and winters creates some instability. That propping was done, but the engineers recommended that the tower was brought down. In fact, in 2019, the government was told that the tower should be taken down above the 10th floor. It's 23 floors high. And so clearly the government, although it hasn't said that publicly yet, is under pressure to deal with the condition of the tower. Just to give you one example, this is the report from 2020. The building may be stable, it cannot be considered as safe as the risk of further damage potentially is a potential risk to those people working on the site, and it will also make the deconstruction of the tower more difficult and dangerous. So I think that tells you what they're dealing with here. Yes, a pressure from these engineers to bring the tower down, but also if they do that, it's going to have to be done very carefully.
Very carefully indeed. And of course, we've heard from some of the families of the bereaved as well as some of the victims. They want this tower to stay there until there are criminal prosecutions for the people who they believe caused the deaths. Where do we stand with those criminal investigations?
Well, just first, there is a range of views about this. There are some people who want it to stay forever. There are some people who want it to stay until there are convictions. There are other people who feel it's just a daily reminder. If you go to that part of London, of what happened to their relatives, and they want it to come down. So there is no one view. And also on the convictions, we've got some time to wait. The police have said they're going to need most of this year to assess the public inquiry's report into the Grenfell Tower fire, to look at whether there's anything they need to do with regard to their prosecution attempts. And then the prosecution has to be, the file has to be sent to the Crown Prosecution Service. They will have to decide whether to prosecute. So really it's several years yet before we're likely to see people heading for courts. And this saga really continues.
It does continue indeed. Tom Simons, thank you so much for that. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Hello, this is BBC News. A new lawsuit alleging drugging and sexual assault has been filed against the US rapper Sean Diddy Combs as he awaits trial on charges of sex trafficking. Our investigations correspondent Rihanna Croxford has been speaking to insiders who worked with him during the 1990s about troubling incidents they say they witnessed at his music label Bad Boy Records. Mr. Combs denies all the allegations.
Sean Combs became a music icon in the 1990s.
Locked in on your dream, locked in.
Rising to fame through his New York hip-hop label, Bad Boy Records. Managing top artists in his 20s, he was making millions.
With all that money, he just became like a different guy.
Daniel Evans worked at the label in the early days.
My role was to oversee the recording budgets.
He says he saw Combs becoming rich, powerful, and threatening.
There was one time where somebody messed up something. He was so pissed. And he says to him, if you do this again, I could hire somebody to get rid of you and they wouldn't even know where to find you.
Do you feel like anyone in the office believed that he might be capable of that?
Anything's possible.
More than 40 people have accused Combs of drugging and assault. These photos, taken from a lawsuit, show him in his recording studio with a girl who alleges she was 17 when he gang raped her there.
The wall of silence has now been broken, and victims are coming forward.
Tony Busby is a lawyer representing dozens of alleged victims from the 1990s to present day.
We have cases where the allegations are that this happened at studios, that this happened at hotels, that this happened at bars, that this happened backstage. And of course, we're still sifting through all of that. We intend to file multiple more cases in the next 2 weeks.
Behind this door is where his old recording studio used to be. It's not that far from Times Square. Former staff have told me that Sean Combs would often bring women here late at night, where some of them said they walked in on him having sex. And one even complained they were asked to get him condoms.
It wasn't uncommon to fly women in from around the country to have sex with people in the studio. If they had a specialty in something, yeah, they would be flown in.
And you would be asked to do that?
Yeah.
Because you were the finance man?
Yeah. And it's coming out of the budget, so.
How much money do you think was spent on these flights, on bringing people in?
Oh, to be honest with you, probably like thousands of dollars.
And he says there's one moment that's played on his mind involving his old boss in the studio.
And I just opened the door, and he's in there, having sex with this girl. You know what? She was so quiet. Yeah.
Did that seem unusual?
Knowing what I know now, there's a lot of speculation about what state she was in.
In a statement, Sean Combs' legal team said, Mr. Combs cannot dignify every publicity stunt or facially absurd claim with a response. He has full confidence in the judicial process where the truth will prevail. These accusations are pure fiction. For now, he's being held here, inside one of New York's most notorious jails, until his trial begins in May. Rihanna Croxford, BBC News, New York.
And if you're watching here in the UK, there's more on that on the podcast Diddy on Trial, and that's on the BBC Sounds app. Now, staying in the UK, the Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has said it should be harder for legal immigrants to apply for British citizenship. She said people should live in the UK for 15 years before they can apply, rather than the current 6 years. Well, let's speak to our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. And Henry, what more do we know about Kemi Badenoch's plans?
Well, this is a significant moment because it's pretty much Kemi Badenoch's first policy since she became Conservative Party leader, and it concerns delaying the process by which people who are already in the UK can change their status so that they stay here for an indefinite period of time or ultimately become British citizens. So at the moment, migrants are typically granted indefinite leave to remain if they've been here for 5 years. Now, what that means is that they can live, work, study here indefinitely for as long as they like. But after a year of having indefinite leave to remain, they can apply for British citizenship. What Kemi Badenoch wants to do is extend those periods. So the waiting period for indefinite leave to remain would be 10 years, up from 5, and then after that it'd be a further 5-year wait to apply for British citizenship. So that would basically mean that you have to be here for at least 15 years before you might be able to apply for British citizenship.
And Henry, as you mentioned there, this is quite a specific policy plan from the new Conservative leader. Why do you think she's making this step now?
Well, we know that immigration is a big issue in British politics. It has been for years and years. But there's a couple of additional factors. One is that on the Conservatives' watch, net migration, so that's the number of people who've come to the UK minus the number of people who've left, has risen to record numbers. In 2023, it was an all-time high of 906,000, subsequently fell a little bit to 700,000 or so, but both of those numbers are way higher than the 100,000 which successive Conservative Prime Ministers repeatedly promised to reduce it to. So that is a clear weakness for the Conservative Party in their record that Kemi Badenoch, who was part of the latter part of those Conservative governments, knows she needs to address. And she's openly saying today that her Conservative predecessors as leader of the Conservative Party got it wrong on migration. But the other thing is the rise in the opinion polls of Reform UK. That's the party led by Nigel Farage. They are to the Conservative Party's right. They are concerning Conservative MPs, and I think this policy is designed to address that threat.
Henry, thank you. That's our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman there. President Trump has signed an executive order banning transgender athletes from female sports competitions. He told an audience at the White House that the war on women's sports was over. Fierce criticism of the Democrats' handling of transgender issues was a feature of Mr. Trump's election campaign. The order threatens to cut off federal funding for their schools, though it's estimated fewer than 10 transgender athletes are among the 500,000 competing.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
Well, let's get more from Jared Hill, who works for our US partners, CBS. Jared, good to have you on the program. So what more do we know about this executive order and its likely impact?
So this is an executive order, as you were mentioning here, focusing on sort of the reinterpretation or a different understanding of what's called Title IX here in the United States, a law surrounding things like, sex and gender and the ways in which the government and the law protects those. And essentially saying here, as we have heard from the Trump administration over the past couple of weeks now since he's been in office, that they are putting through this policy that there are only both two genders and two sexes, sort of conflating the two, man and woman, male, female. This would effectively end any ability for anyone who was assigned male at birth to be participating in any sports that are designated for women. There's also some talk from the Trump administration about schools creating maybe a sort of a third co-ed type of league within their schools as well to sort of get around this issue.
And Jared, we also saw the president sign executive orders stating that there are only two sexes in the US, as you mentioned. What's the reaction to these policies from transgender campaigners?
So, I mean, any transgender supporters of President Trump, from what we've seen so far, and one of the bigger names, obviously, is Caitlyn Jenner, is in favor of this notion. It's yet to be seen how much of an issue this will be for him and for other Republicans going forward, especially as, all sights at this point are set on the 2026 midterm elections for Congress.
And any possible impact on the sporting community ahead of the Olympics in LA?
So that is a possibility. We do know that one of these executive orders signed by President Trump does allow for the Secretary of State as well as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security here in the United States to push the International Olympic Committee to try and create its own ban on any transgender athletes ahead of the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Again, what that looks like from any sort of a regulatory standpoint is yet to be seen.
Indeed. Jared Hill from CBS, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, an earthquake registering a magnitude of 5.2 has been recorded between the Greek islands of Amorgos and Santorini. I think we should hopefully be able to show you those pictures. Let's see if we can show them to you. Of course, these are incredible pictures that we've seen of that earthquake that has struck between the Greek islands of Amorgos and Santorini. And of course, more than 11,000 people have already left the popular tourist destination in recent days as a result of that earthquakes. Now, Sir Keir Starmer says the government is changing planning rules to make it easier to build nuclear reactors in England and Wales. Ministers hope the reforms will create thousands of highly skilled jobs. But the campaign group Greenpeace has warned the nuclear industry has an unmatched record in delayed and over-budget projects. So let's just show you some live pictures we have coming in from Örebro. This is in Sweden, of course. This is a press conference. We can't show those pictures there, but this is a press conference by authorities following that mass shooting, the worst in the country's history. We'll have more on that after this short break. Stay with us.